A shocking podcast confession from Jimin about Jungkook's private habit goes viral until Jungkook's eerie reaction turns the story upside down. Why would he do that in the shower? Jimin blurted out wide-eyed as the studio lights flickered above him, casting long, twitching shadows on the black foam walls. The room fell into a stunned silence. Yoongi's hand hovered uncertainly above the audio mixer as if unsure whether to cut the feed or let it ride. Taehyung's laugh died in his throat. Even the staff behind the glass, usually unshakable, froze mid-sip of their coffees, exchanging uneasy glances. This was no longer just a casual episode of their limited-release, members-only podcast, Behind the Echo. This was a moment spiraling far beyond what any of them had prepared for. And Jimin. Jimin looked like he wanted to disappear. He tried to laugh it off, rubbing the back of his neck, but the color had drained from his face. I mean, it's not bad or anything. Just weird. Like, super weird. He thinks no one knows, but The door creaked open. A figure stepped in, soaking wet. His hoodie clung to his body, and the ends of his black hair dripped steadily onto the studio floor. Jungkook. Everyone stared. The silence cracked. Jungkook's gaze didn't move to the cameras or the crew. It locked directly onto Jimin. You told them, he said softly, the words barely audible over the low hum of the soundboard. Not angry. Not surprised. Just calm. Too calm. Jimin swallowed hard. I didn't mean to. It slipped. They were asking about habits and... You told them. Jungkook took a slow step forward, water trailing behind him like ink bleeding across a white page. In that moment, something shifted in the room. The tension was no longer about embarrassment or friendly teasing, it was heavier, stranger. Something deeper, older, humming just beneath the surface like a secret trying to claw its way out. A flicker of confusion passed through Taehyung's eyes. Wait. How did you even know we were recording? Jungkook finally looked away from Jimin, his head tilting ever so slightly like he was listening to something only he could hear. I always know, he said. Then he smiled. But it wasn't the smile that had lit up stadiums or melted millions of hearts on screen. It was tight. Off. Like it had been stitched onto his face by invisible hands. Yoongi swore under his breath. The episode hadn't even gone live, but the damage was already done. The camera was still rolling and the live editing team, despite all protocol, had been streaming a teaser to a small, private beta group of fans. One of them had recorded it. One had leaked it. By the next morning, #Jimin exposes Jungkook was trending worldwide. The internet was ablaze with theories. Does Jungkook talk to himself in the shower? Did he build a recording studio in his bathroom? Wait, is he rehearsing full concerts naked? But no one could have predicted the truth. Because even Jimin didn't know the full story behind what he'd seen, what he'd heard on that one night 3 months ago when he'd come home early from rehearsal. He'd never meant to peek. He only wanted to grab a drink from the kitchen. But the light under the bathroom door had been on. Music was playing. And above it all, a voice, not Jungkook's, had been whispering something in a language Jimin didn't recognize. At first he'd thought it was some strange vocal exercise. Until he'd heard Jungkook reply. Not in words, but in laughter. A low, broken, otherworldly laughter that didn't belong to anyone Jimin knew. That sound had haunted him ever since. And now the whole world was listening. But what terrified Jimin most, what made his hands tremble as he watched Jungkook slowly approach the mic, wasn't the secret habit itself. It was the feeling that he hadn't just exposed Jungkook. He'd unleashed him. The storm outside had been growing steadily since dawn, hammering the glass windows of the studio with relentless sheets of rain. Inside, the tension that had rippled through the room last night hadn't subsided, it had deepened. The usual laughter that filled their group chats was absent. The jokes had stopped. Everyone was waiting. Jimin sat alone in the green room, gripping a lukewarm cup of coffee that had long stopped steaming. He hadn't slept. His mind was spinning, haunted by the echo of Jungkook's voice, or whatever it was that had worn his voice the night before. The way Jungkook had smiled tight, lifeless, wasn't something he could shake. The leak had detonated online. Their management scrambled to contain it, issuing vague statements about fabricated content and taken out of context claims. But it was too late. Clips from the unreleased podcast had spread like wildfire, dissected in real time by millions of curious fans and opportunistic tabloids. Edits, remixes, slow-motion breakdowns of Jungkook's expression, audio enhancements to isolate background noises every second had been picked apart. And yet, no one had even begun to guess the real danger. Not even close. The door swung open. Taehyung walked in without knocking, his eyes bloodshot, his voice a low rasp. He's back at the dorm. Jimin didn't need to ask who. He said he doesn't remember anything after walking into the studio, Taehyung continued. He woke up in bed with his clothes soaked. Said he thought it was a dream. Jimin stood slowly, the muscles in his legs stiff from hours of tension. You believe that? Taehyung shrugged helplessly. I believe he thinks it's true. The green room door slammed again. This time it was Jungkook. His face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. We need to talk. Privately. They followed him into the editing suite, a soundproof room lined with monitors and tangled wires. Jungkook locked the door behind them. I pulled the backup audio from last night, he said, sitting down and pulling up a waveform that pulsed across the screen in jagged spikes. You need to hear this. He hit play. At first, it was just the podcast feed, the awkward laughter, the shift in tone as Jimin made the confession. Then came the silence. And in that silence, there was something else. A faint, low hum, almost like a growl. Then layered beneath it a whisper, not in Korean, not in English. A language that scratched against the ears like broken glass. What the hell is that? Taehyung asked, his voice barely audible. It started before Jungkook opened the door, Jungkook said. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was in the studio. And it gets louder every time he speaks. The whisper intensified. Then it changed pitch as if answering someone. Is that two voices? Jimin asked, leaning closer to the speaker. Jungkook nodded slowly. One of them is definitely his. The other was not. They played it again. Louder this time. The second voice crackled through the speakers, higher, brittle, and strangely melodic. It didn't sound human. Not entirely. As it spoke, Jimin felt the hairs on his arms rise. Then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered. The monitor cut to black. What the hell? Taehyung snapped, standing quickly. A shriek of feedback pierced the room. Jimin clutched his ears, stumbling back. The sound was too high, too sharp, it wasn't natural. Jungkook slammed the power button and the system shut down. Silence returned. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Jungkook whispered, I think it followed him back. By the time they reached the dorm, the rain had turned into a full storm. Wind lashed at their coats and thunder shook the streets as they ran inside, breathless and soaked. Jungkook was in the kitchen. He looked up from a pot of boiling ramen, his expression blank. Hey, he said cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. Taehyung stared at him. Are you okay? Jungkook tilted his head. Why wouldn't I be? Jimin stepped forward cautiously. You remember the podcast? Jungkook frowned. Not really. I was tired. I guess I crashed early. You came to the studio dripping wet, Taehyung said, stepping around the counter. You looked not like yourself. Jungkook chuckled. What does that mean? No one laughed. Jungkook pulled out his phone. You want to hear what you sounded like? Jungkook looked amused. Is this another prank? But when Jungkook hit play, Jungkook's smile slowly faded. The audio was distorted even on a small device. The second voice sounded more alien than ever, whispering in sync with Jungkook's own. He didn't move. Didn't blink. His face was blank, but his hands were trembling. I didn't, Jungkook whispered. I never said those words. I don't even know what language that is. Jimin stepped forward. You've been talking in your sleep. For weeks. Jungkook looked at him, startled. How would you know? Jimin hesitated. Because I heard you. That night I came back early. You weren't alone in the bathroom. Jungkook's face drained of color. I thought it was a joke at first, Jimin continued. Some recording or weird lyrics. But then you laughed. Jungkook backed away, bumping into the counter. No, he whispered. No, that can't be. Taehyung's voice was low. What's happening to you, Jungkook? I don't know, he said, eyes wide. But I've been having dreams. Every night since tour ended. There's something in the mirror. Watching me. And sometimes I feel like I'm not alone even when I lock the door. Like there's a voice inside my head that isn't mine. Jimin's voice shook. What does it say? Jungkook looked down. It says I belong to it. The lights flickered again. Then everything went dark. The blackout lasted for nearly 30 minutes. When the emergency power came on, they found Jungkook unconscious on the bathroom floor. The mirror was cracked. And written in steam across the glass was a single word, jagged and clawed. Echo. He woke screaming. No one slept that night. By morning, the hashtag had mutated. Hashtag Jungkook possessed. Hashtag echo inside. Hashtag BTS haunting. Armies split into two camps, those who thought it was all a viral marketing stunt and those who were terrified. Fan theories grew darker. Some believed the group had accidentally summoned something during a tour in Japan. Others pointed to a cursed artifact gifted to them by a mysterious fan in South America. A few mentioned the hallway, a stretch of hotel corridor they'd stayed in last year where all the clocks had stopped at 3:33 a.m. Management refused interviews. But the podcast was now public whether they liked it or not. And Jungkook. Jungkook was changing. He moved through the days like a shadow of himself, polite, smiling, saying all the right things, but hollow behind the eyes. He said he was fine. That he didn't remember what had happened. That he was just tired. But they all saw it. He stopped singing in the shower. Stopped laughing. He stopped looking in mirrors. And some nights when the dorm was quiet and the others had gone to bed, Jimin would lie awake and hear soft whispers from behind the bathroom door. Whispers in a voice he now feared more than anything. His own. Jimin's voice was barely a whisper spoken into the cold hush of morning when even the birds outside their dorm were silent. The air smelled of rain and old incense, the remnants of the failed cleansing ritual Namjoon had arranged 2 nights ago. Nothing had worked. If anything, things had grown worse. Jungkook hadn't slept again. None of them had, really. But it was different for him. He didn't seem tired. He seemed fractured. Pieces of him flickering in and out of coherence like a skipping video, there one moment, gone the next. Sometimes he'd forget what day it was or call Jimin by a name that didn't exist. Other times he'd just watch the others silently as though memorizing the way they breathed. This morning he was in the kitchen again, stirring black coffee without drinking it. His hand moved in slow, perfect circles like he was caught in a trance. His reflection shimmered faintly in the steel fridge door, his real self staring straight ahead while the reflection lingered half a second too long, blinked when he didn't. Jimin walked in, stiff with dread. He had started counting how long Jungkook would go without speaking. It was never more than 3 minutes. The longest pause had ended with Jungkook uttering a phrase in the same strange language from the podcast, then vomiting black water into the sink. Jimin kept his distance. "You should rest," he said, careful to keep his tone neutral. Jungkook tilted his head. "I don't get tired anymore." There it was, that detached, emotionless lilt that didn't quite sound like him. "You're not okay?" Jimin pressed, feeling the heat in his chest begin to rise, the panic swelling like a pressure valve ready to burst. "This thing, whatever it is, it's not just dreams or trauma, Kook. You change. We all see it. And the mirror, don't look at it." Jungkook gave a small, humorless smile. "That's where he lives." Jimin froze. "Who?" he asked. Jungkook slowly turned his head. His eyes were glassy, almost fevered. "The one who remembers." Before Jimin could respond, a sudden crash came from the hallway. Both of them jolted, rushing toward the noise. Taehyung was standing in the corridor, heart pounding, staring at the shattered pieces of a full-length mirror that had fallen from its wall mount. The edges were sharp, blood-dark in the low light. "I didn't touch it," he breathed. "I swear I didn't." Yoongi appeared seconds later, his face pale. "Check the cameras." Namjoon was already one step ahead, typing furiously into his laptop in the living room. The dorm's internal surveillance had been installed last year for security. No one ever expected they'd need it to monitor each other. He rewound the hallway feed. The footage showed the mirror. Empty hallway. No movement. Nothing unusual. Then, at 3:33 a.m., the reflection in the mirror changed. There was no one standing in front of it. But the mirror showed a figure. A silhouette. Tall. Shadowy. Twisting at the edges as if the camera lens couldn't quite focus. Then the mirror cracked on its own, clean down the middle, before crashing to the floor. Everyone went quiet. "No way, that's a glitch," Namjoon said, voice hoarse. Yoongi stared at Jungkook. "Is this what's been happening to you?" Jungkook didn't answer. His hands were shaking again. "Tell us what you see in the mirror," Namjoon said. But Jungkook only said one word, "Me." They called in help that night. A monk from a temple in Jeongju recommended by one of their stylists. He arrived with little fanfare, a kind-faced man in plain robes carrying only a weathered satchel and a sense of calm that seemed almost impenetrable. He introduced himself as Hyun. "I've seen similar cases," he said quietly after the group explained what had been happening. "Not all spirits are from this world. Some are echoes, imprints left behind by something not meant to exist. Sometimes they find a voice, a vessel. Sometimes they take root in places of deep energy." He looked at Jungkook for a long, heavy moment. "Sometimes," he said, "they find a person." The ceremony took place at midnight. The dorm was dark, save for the candles placed in each corner. Hyun led Jungkook into the center of the living room, drew symbols on the floor in red chalk, and began chanting in a deep, rhythmic tone that didn't sound like any language the others recognized. For a while, it seemed to work. Jungkook's eyes fluttered. His breath slowed. The air in the room grew lighter. Then everything stopped. The candles blew out without wind. The floor trembled. And from Jungkook's throat came a low, guttural voice that did not belong to him. "You don't speak for me," it growled. Jimin backed away. The others stood frozen. Hyun stepped forward. What are you? He demanded. There was a silence. Then the voice answered. I am what remains. Jungkook's body rose into the air just slightly, an inch off the floor, enough to break every law of gravity. His arms dropped limp at his sides. His head tilted back, mouth open as if gasping for breath. But the voice kept coming even as his lungs didn't move. I remember the boy who sang in the dark. I remember the mirror that watched. I remember the world before this one. Why him? Namjoon asked. The voice laughed dry, rasping. Because he listens. Then the candles reignited all at once. And Jungkook collapsed. It took an hour to calm down. The monk, shaken but composed, explained that the entity had bonded to Jungkook through a moment of vulnerability, perhaps during tour or while dreaming. The exact origin wasn't clear. But it wasn't just haunting him. It was merging with him. You have to sever the connection before it completes, Hyun warned. Once fully merged, he won't be himself anymore. How do we stop it? Jimin asked. There's only one way, Hyun said. You must go to the place where the bond began. Where he first let it in. They looked at Jungkook, who now lay unconscious on the couch. Then they remembered something. 3 months ago. A hotel in Sapporo. Jungkook had been alone that night. Insisted on it. Everyone else had gone out for ramen. He stayed behind. When they returned, he was sleepwalking. Standing in the hallway, hand pressed flat against the mirror outside his room. They hadn't thought much of it. Until now. We're going back to Japan, Namjoon said. Their flight was quiet. The team arranged everything under the guise of a short break. No one knew what was really happening, not the fans, not the press, not even their families. Only the 6 of them and Jungkook, who now sat at the window, staring out into clouds like they were trying to whisper something back. When they landed, the air felt different. Colder. Heavier. The hotel staff still remembered them. They smiled, bowed, offered welcome tea. They didn't know the group had come to face a ghost. They returned to the same floor. Same hallway. Same mirror. It was still there. Framed in gold, spotless. Jungkook stood in front of it. Do you remember what happened? Jimin asked softly. Jungkook nodded. I sang. What song? Jungkook's voice was barely audible. Not one of ours. I don't know where I learned it. I heard it in a dream. I thought it was beautiful. Can you sing it now? Jungkook hesitated. Then slowly began to hum. The melody was eerie. Mournful. Familiar, but not from this world. As he sang, the mirror began to ripple. The glass shifted like water. And the reflection changed. Not just distorted, but alive. It blinked. Then reached out. Jimin screamed. Taehyung grabbed Jungkook, pulling him back just as a hand shot through the mirror, long fingers, pale, grasping, made of fog and shadow. It swiped the air where Jungkook had just stood, then retreated with a hiss like steam. The mirror cracked. Hyun stepped forward. This is the source, he said. This is where we break it. He drew symbols on the glass. Lit incense. Began chanting once more. This time, the glass didn't shatter. It melted. And from the pool of liquefied reflection, something emerged. A shape. A creature. Not a ghost. Not a man. Something in between. Jungkook stepped forward before anyone could stop him. I see you, he said. The thing paused. And whispered, do you want to forget? Jungkook's hands clenched. I want you out. Then, with a sudden cry, he reached forward and touched the thing's chest. There was a blinding light. A scream not from the entity, but from Jungkook. And then, nothing. Just silence. And smoke. When it cleared, Jungkook was lying on the ground. The mirror was gone. Just an empty frame. Back in Seoul, things slowly returned to normal. Mostly. The podcast episode was removed from all platforms, quietly scrubbed. The dorm was quiet again. Jungkook was himself. Almost. But Jimin sometimes caught him staring into dark windows at night as if waiting for something. And sometimes just before sleep, Jungkook would hum that strange melody. Very softly. Just under his breath. Stop humming that song. The words came out sharper than Jimin intended, slicing the silence of the dorm's hallway like broken glass through still water. It was past midnight, and the only source of light was the dim glow from the open fridge. Jungkook stood barefoot in the kitchen, head bowed, shoulders rising and falling gently, the strange, sorrowful melody whispering past his lips. He didn't turn around. Jimin stood stiff in the hallway, the unease curling in his gut like a coiled snake. Ever since their return from Sapporo, the air around Jungkook hadn't just shifted, it had thickened. Something about him felt less rooted. As if part of him hadn't made it back through that mirror. Or worse, had brought something else with him. Seriously, Jimin repeated, voice trembling now. Don't sing that. Jungkook slowly turned, eyes half-lidded, gaze unreadable. Why? Jimin swallowed hard. Because it's not yours. A flicker of something passed through Jungkook's eyes, brief, unplaceable. I dreamed it last night, he said softly. But I wasn't the one singing. It was my voice, but not me. He was standing in a room full of mirrors. And every time he sang, one broke. Jimin stepped closer, careful, like approaching a wild animal. You said it was over. That we broke the connection. That it was gone. I thought we did, Jungkook murmured, rubbing his forehead as though trying to dig the memory out of his skull. But sometimes I still feel him. Just watching. Not inside, not controlling me, just waiting. Then let's talk to the others, Jimin said, voice firm. We tell Namjoon. Yoongi. We bring Hyun back. We don't keep this to ourselves. I am telling you, Jungkook snapped suddenly, the anger flashing in his voice like thunder. You're the only one who's been honest about being scared. The others, they just want it to be over so bad they'll pretend it is. Jimin stepped back. The fridge's compressor clicked off. The kitchen plunged into silence. And then Jungkook's expression changed. He looked confused. Distant. A hand trembled near his side. Jimin, he whispered. If something happens to me. If I'm not myself again. Don't, Jimin said quickly, cutting him off. Don't talk like that. We're going to figure it out. We always do. I'm scared of hurting you, Jungkook said, voice thin as smoke. Not with my hands. With him. I think he wants you. Jimin didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jungkook. By morning, the nightmares began to spread. The first was Taehyung. He burst into the dining room half-dressed, eyes wide, hands shaking. He was in my room, he gasped, pointing at Jungkook. Not you. But, not. Jungkook looked up from his untouched cereal. What do you mean? You were standing at the foot of my bed. Singing. Your mouth wasn't moving, but I heard you. I tried to wake up. Couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Namjoon stood slowly. Are you sure it wasn't sleep paralysis? It wasn't, Taehyung snapped. When I finally woke up, I mean really woke up, my mirror was cracked. Again. And my ears were ringing. Yoongi pulled out his phone, already typing. We need to contact Hyun. But this time, the monk didn't answer. His temple said he had vanished during a meditation retreat 3 days ago. Gone. No trace. Jeon, calling from LA, sounded shaken when he heard. This isn't just about Jungkook anymore, is it? Namjoon didn't respond. He didn't need to. Something had passed from Jungkook into the rest of them, whispers, songs, fragments. The echo hadn't been destroyed. It had been released. And it was multiplying. That night, the dorm vibrated with tension. Jimin sat on the floor of his room, cross-legged, phone in hand, scrolling through old videos of their rehearsals, interviews, moments of laughter. Jungkook's face stared back at him again and again, genuine, bright, full of music. He paused on one video. A behind-the-scenes clip during their Black Swan rehearsals. Jungkook was warming up, singing lightly in the corner. But as Jimin watched closer, frame by frame, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The mirror behind Jungkook didn't reflect the same movement. Jungkook lifted his hand to run it through his hair. But the reflection didn't. The clip was from months ago. Before Japan. Before the podcast. Jimin replayed it 10 times. The reflection blinked before Jungkook did. He showed the others. They gathered in silence around Jimin's phone. Namjoon's face had gone pale. This isn't possession, he said finally. This thing, it's older than we thought. It's been around him longer than we realized. What if it didn't come through the mirror? Taehyung whispered. What if it's always been here? Yoongi leaned forward. Then the question becomes, why now? What triggered it? Jimin spoke softly. What if it was the podcast? Everyone turned to him. What if talking about it out loud, naming it, gave it power, he said. What if exposing it, giving it a voice in public, let it out? Like it needed to be heard. Jungkook, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, spoke now, his voice cold. That's exactly what it wanted. They all stared. He looked up. He told me. In the dream. He said, once they listen, I don't need to hide anymore. The next day, all of their fan sites went down. Every page with Jungkook's face glitched. Old interviews turned into garbled noise. Some pages played the melody distorted, haunting, over black screens. One site flashed a phrase in Hangul that no one could trace to any known source. He came through the mirror. He stays through the ears. Armies panicked. Theories exploded. Hashtag Jungkook cursed. Hashtag mirror virus. Hashtag echo cult. Management shut down the online presence of the group temporarily. Public appearances were cancelled. They were told not to speak to media, not to post, not to go near reflective surfaces unless necessary. And still, it spread. Fans reported having dreams of singing voices. Whispers in languages they didn't know. Mirrors cracking in their homes. And Jungkook? He stopped eating. Stopped speaking. Sometimes he stood in front of the dorm's hallway mirror for hours. Not moving. Not blinking. Just listening. It was Namjoon who suggested the unthinkable. We need to record a second podcast. Jimin stared at him like he'd gone mad. Why? After what happened with the first one? Because it hurt itself, Namjoon said, hands clasped. And that gave it strength. Maybe if we record again, this time naming it fully, facing it, we can trap it. Maybe it's tied to being perceived. Maybe it needs attention to exist. You want to broadcast this thing again? Taehyung said. Did you not see what happened to the last host? Yoongi stepped in. What's the alternative? Wait for it to take Jungkook completely? Let it jump to the rest of us? It's already trying. Then what do we say? Jimin asked. How do you fight a thing that speaks through us? Jungkook, barely conscious on the couch, opened his mouth. You sing back. Everyone turned to him. Jungkook's eyes were bloodshot but focused. If it came through a song, then we answer with a better one. Not just speak its name, drown it out. They recorded the second podcast in secret. No team. No cameras. Just the 6 of them. One mic. One take. Jungkook sat in the center, pale and trembling, headphones over his ears. Around him, the others waited ready, terrified. The episode began. Jimin started. Last time, we made a mistake. We let something speak. Tonight, we speak back. Yoongi added, what you're about to hear isn't a song. It's a warning. Namjoon, you may feel something. Cold. Pressure. Like you're being watched. That's how you know he's listening. Jungkook lifted the mic. And began to sing. The same melody. But slower. Twisted. Then he shifted. New words. New tones. A counter-melody. Beautiful, bright, filled with pain but also resistance. The shadows flickered in the corners of the room. They kept singing. Together. Voices overlapping, raw, defiant. The mic sparked once. Then the lights blew out. But the song continued. Until the air turned still again. And the mirror in the hallway cracked for weeks, shattered completely. They called the episode Echo Reversed. It was never uploaded. But somehow it spread anyway. Like a virus. Except this time people reported healing. The dreams stopped. The humming vanished. The mirrors stayed whole. And Jungkook. Jungkook came back. The color returned to his skin. His eyes lit up again. But every now and then, just before dawn, when the world was still dark, he'd reach for the mic in his room. And whisper. I hear you still. Then he'd sing. Just a note. Just enough. To keep the echo quiet. Don't stop. Keep recording. Namjoon's voice was urgent, trembling on the edge of panic as the red light on the recording interface flickered against the haze-filled studio. Yoongi's fingers hovered over the controls, unsure whether to obey or shut everything down. The lights above buzzed with low-frequency static and something deep, something old, rattled inside the walls like the bones of forgotten songs trying to shake themselves loose. Jungkook was in the center of the recording room, his eyes closed, face bathed in sweat. His voice, his real voice, was fading beneath the layers of overlapping harmonies. But the melody he sang now wasn't the echo's tune. It was something else. A response. A war cry in musical form. Then the speakers screamed. Not feedback. A voice. Male? Female? Neither. I remember you. The sound sent Jimin stumbling back from the glass window. Taehyung dropped the mic he was holding. Jeon, who had just returned to Korea hours earlier, stood frozen behind Namjoon, fists clenched, lips moving in silent prayer. Yoongi stared at the screen where the waveform pulsed erratically. No pattern. No rhythm. Just chaos, pure and wild and alive. Jungkook opened his eyes. They glowed with moisture, not tears, but something colder. Something ancient. He stepped back from the mic and looked at the others through the glass. He's not gone, he said quietly. He never was. I think, he's in all of us now. Silence fell. Then the power cut. The room plunged into darkness. And they heard it. The humming. This time it came from everywhere. They didn't speak of it again for 2 days. The team told them to rest. To take a break from each other, from the music, from the microphones, from the internet. The studio was closed for a deep cleanse, the audio files destroyed, except Yoongi had kept a copy. He hadn't told anyone yet, but he'd hidden it on a flash drive, labeled only with the date and a single word, resonance. Jimin didn't leave his room. He couldn't. Every time he tried to go near a mirror, he would see the reflection hesitate. Linger. As if it was waiting for him to blink. Taehyung started drawing again. The same image over and over, a faceless figure with its mouth open, stitched shut, then open again. Namjoon filled notebook after notebook with lyrics, none of which he could remember writing. Jeon had changed. He wasn't joking anymore. And Jungkook. Jungkook had stopped sleeping entirely. He wandered the dorm at night like a ghost. Checking doors. Tapping walls. Listening. He said he could hear something beneath the floors. Said it sounded like the inside of a song if a song could breathe. On the third night, Jimin found him on the roof. I think I'm remembering things that never happened, Jungkook said without turning. But they feel more real than anything I've lived. Jimin stepped forward, arms crossed against the chill. What kind of things? There's a room, Jungkook whispered. White walls. Black piano. No doors. And someone is sitting with their back to me. Playing. Over and over. The same song. And when I try to speak, I realize I'm the one playing. I just forgot how I got there. Jimin's stomach dropped. Do you think it's him? I think, Jungkook said, it's us. Or some part of us we weren't supposed to find. He turned then, eyes glassy, haunted. What if this isn't a haunting? What if it's a memory? They met again in the studio 3 days later. All of them. No managers. No cameras. Just 7 friends and a question that had grown too loud to ignore. Do you think we created him? Jean asked, voice low. No one answered right away. Then Taehyung said, what if Echo isn't a spirit? What if it's a resonance? A consequence of everything we've poured into our voices, the pain, the pressure, the shadows we never deal with. What if we made him by singing too much of ourselves into the world? Namjoon stared down at his lyric book. Sound is energy. It doesn't disappear. What if, over the years, it gathered somewhere it wasn't supposed to? Jungkook stood near the mic, head tilted. What if we're the vessel? Yoongi finally looked up. Then we have to find where it's going. They traveled again. Not to a place on the map, but to a memory. Jungkook led them. It wasn't planned. He just knew. They drove through the countryside, far from Seoul, to a dilapidated theater they'd once visited years ago for a photo shoot. Abandoned. Forgotten. The type of place you remember in dreams, not reality. The inside was worse than they remembered. The stage sagged under its own weight. The seats were covered in dust and mold. The air smelled of rust and rotting velvet. But the acoustics perfect. It echoed. Every step. Every breath. Jungkook walked to the center of the stage and began to hum again. The others followed. One by one they added harmony just like in rehearsals. The walls shook. Not violently but like something listened. Jungkook's voice rose. The room sang back. Not an echo. A response. The air turned cold. And then they saw him. In the wings. Tall. Still. Watching. No face. No body. Just outline. The shape of grief. Yoongi stepped back. We shouldn't be here. But Jungkook walked toward the figure. Jimin reached out. No, Kook, stop. Jungkook kept walking. The closer he got, the more distorted he became, like light bending through water. He stepped into the wings. And disappeared. Just like that. Gone. The figure vanished with him. They screamed his name. No reply. It took 12 hours. 12 hours of searching, screaming, running through the broken theater. Then at dawn, they heard singing. From the basement. They followed it. Down. Down. Into a room that should not have existed. And there. Jungkook. Sitting at a piano. Playing. Weeping. The room around him shimmered like heat. When he saw them, he didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just whispered, he's gone. Then he collapsed. The doctors said it was exhaustion. Psychosomatic trauma. Jungkook stayed in the hospital for a week. Didn't speak. Didn't move. Until one day he looked up at Jimin and said, I don't hear him anymore. You sure? Jungkook nodded. But I remember everything. He started writing again. The others did too. Not love songs. Not dance tracks. Something raw. Dark. Real. They called the new project Harmonic Rift. An album of grief, memory, survival. No promotions. No variety shows. Just music. Stripped. Bare. Haunted. The fans didn't understand at first. But then they listened. Really listened. And they felt it. The shift. The truth behind the music. And somewhere deep in the frequency, a final whisper. Faint. Distant. Fading. I remember you. But no echo replied. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a small analog clock mounted above the door. Jungkook sat at the edge of the studio couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at the hardwood floor as if it might crack open and offer answers. The others were scattered across the space in varying degrees of silence and exhaustion. The smell of stale coffee and old sound foam lingered in the air like the ghost of their sleepless nights. Yoongi had been the first to speak. It wasn't just trauma, he said, his voice low but certain as if finally choosing not to tiptoe around the obvious anymore. We all felt it. We saw it. Heard it. You can't gaslight a whole group out of a haunting. Possession, Jean added softly, sitting across from him. Or resonance, or something we don't have a name for yet. Jungkook looked up. Then what the hell was that thing in the theater? No one answered. Namjoon had been scribbling in his journal again, his pen moving in tight, anxious circles. He finally set it down and said, I've been studying the frequencies we recorded from that last session, the one we did before everything disappeared. Jimin's eyes narrowed. And? Namjoon hesitated. There's something there. Between 17.8 and 18.2 kilohertz. It's a range the average human ear can barely register. But it's consistent in every file. Every echo. And it's not supposed to be. Taehyung frowned. So what does that mean? We triggered a frequency demon. Namjoon shot him a look, but not of dismissal. It means we might have accidentally tapped into something that's always been here. A wavelength. A layer of sound, of memory. Something buried under all the noise of the world. Jungkook's voice cut in firm. You mean a place? Namjoon turned toward him. Maybe. Jungkook nodded slowly. I've seen it. I've been there. The white room with the piano. The walls aren't made of plaster, they're made of sound. Pure resonance. He lived in that frequency. And we gave him a voice by exposing it. By broadcasting it. Yoongi leaned forward, eyes sharp. Then what happens if we play it again? Everyone froze. Jimin was the first to react. Are you insane? We barely survived the last one. Jungkook almost didn't come back. You want to throw us into that again? We need to understand what we're dealing with, Yoongi said. We can't run from it if it's living inside every track we've ever made. Jean rubbed his temple. And if it wakes something worse? Taehyung looked up. Then we fight it. The silence that followed wasn't fearful. It was resignation. Because deep down, they all knew they weren't free yet. This thing, this echo, this presence, it hadn't finished its song. And maybe, just maybe, neither had they. Namjoon stood. There's only one studio that can handle the range I need to record this safely. Where? Jimin asked. Namjoon gave a tight smile. Sweden. They flew under aliases. No staff. No publicist. Just the 7 of them. Namjoon had reached out to a retired sound engineer, Eric Lundstrom, who had specialized in high-frequency sonic mapping. He hadn't worked in the music industry in over a decade, retreating to a cabin studio in the outskirts of Ljusdal after a personal breakdown during a session involving sound distortion experiments that had, according to him, fractured the barrier. He agreed to see them. They arrived on a snowy evening, the forest silent and heavy with the weight of a coming storm. The cabin was tucked deep within a valley, its wooden panels nearly swallowed by thick pine and frost. Eric met them at the door, tall and gaunt, his face as pale as the snow, his eyes sharp and afraid. You brought it with you, he said immediately. We're trying to understand it, Namjoon replied. Eric stared at Jungkook. He's the vessel. Jungkook nodded without flinching. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with analog equipment, tape reels, heavy mixers, and a single central recording chamber lined with copper wiring and insulation thicker than anything they'd seen. Eric explained it was designed to prevent external frequencies from contaminating internal recordings. Or escaping. You don't just record something like this, Eric said as he prepared the console. You contain it. You document it like a live organism. You trap it in a sonic cage. And then what? Yoongi asked. You pray it doesn't remember how to scream. They began the session at midnight. Jungkook stepped into the chamber, alone. Yoongi manned the board. Eric and Namjoon monitored the frequency spectrum. Jimin stood by the door, one hand on the emergency power. The others watched in silence. Jungkook placed his hands on the mic and began to hum. The tone was low at first, vulnerable, almost broken. Then he added words. Not Korean. Not any known language. But it moved something. The walls trembled. The lights dimmed. The spectrum lit up. 18.1 kilohertz sustained. And then a response. Not from Jungkook. From inside the chamber. A harmony, high, beautiful, terrible. Jungkook's head snapped back. His mouth still. But the singing continued. Yoongi shouted through the mic, Kook, stop. Jungkook's body jerked forward, eyes rolled back, hands clenched so tightly blood ran from his palms. I remember you, the voice screamed. Then, the glass cracked. Eric hit the kill switch. Silence. Darkness. Then Jungkook collapsed. They found him breathing, barely conscious, eyes filled with something between fear and awe. I saw him again, he whispered. But he wasn't alone this time. Yoongi's heart dropped. What do you mean? There were others. Thousands. All singing. All trapped in mirrors made of sound. All waiting for their voices to be heard. Namjoon sat slowly. They're not spirits. Their memories. Lost frequencies. Their songs, Jungkook said. Unfinished songs. Jimin sat beside him, voice barely audible. Then what are we? Jungkook turned to him, face pale and raw. Their instrument. They returned to Seoul in silence. The copy of the recording remained locked inside Eric's studio under strict encryption. But it didn't matter. The melody had embedded itself in them. They began hearing it in dreams again, not terrifying, but calling. Calling them to finish what had begun. One night, Jimin sat at the piano. He played a single note. It vibrated the mirror behind him. Cracked it. Then healed. He smiled faintly. Maybe the only way out was through. Through the frequency. Through the unfinished songs. Through him. And when Jungkook joined in, singing the counter-melody, there were no whispers this time. Only silence. But it felt like the kind of silence that comes after an answer. An invitation. And maybe a warning. The rain had not stopped for 2 days. Not a drizzle, not a passing drizzle that washed off the city's sins, but a storm with weight and rhythm. Like something deliberate. Like something listening to itself fall. It tapped against the windows of the studio like knuckles asking for permission. Inside HYB's private B1 studio, a rarely used, sound-insulated room originally designed to record the group's earliest albums, Jimin sat cross-legged on the floor, his phone in his hands, staring at the waveform of the last recording Eric had sent them. Though Eric had sworn he'd deleted everything, the file had appeared on Jimin's email with no subject, no body, just an attachment labeled "Don't Let It Die." Wave. It was clean. Too clean. Not a glitch in sight. But when he played it, he could feel the air inside his chest shift. His throat tightened like someone was adjusting the frequency of his bones. Behind him, the door creaked. "You're listening to it again." Jungkook's voice was quiet. Not accusatory. Just tired. Jimin turned. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jungkook nodded. "It's not a song. It's an opening." "Then why did Eric send it back?" "I think," Jungkook said, moving into the room, "because he couldn't bear to be the last one to hear it." Jimin stood, fidgeting. "What do we do with it now? It's not something we can release. We don't even know what it is. Every time we listen, it grows. Like it's evolving. Remember Taehyung's nosebleed after he looped it for an hour?" Jungkook didn't reply. He stepped forward and stared at the waveform as it idled on Jimin's screen. It looked ordinary. Harmless. But they knew better. "Where's Namjoon?" Jungkook asked. He went back to the original echo logs. Said he missed something in the transcriptions. Youngie's helping him. "And the others?" "Jin's been at the temple. He's not coming back for a while." Taehyung. Jimin hesitated, then looked away. "He hasn't been sleeping." Jungkook's voice was nearly a whisper. "Has he started hearing it without audio?" Jimin nodded once. Jungkook's face turned unreadable. "Then we don't have much time." Later that evening, the 6 of them sat around the long conference table, the same one they had once used to brainstorm album concepts and laugh about stupid fashion trends. The tension in the room made it hard to breathe. Namjoon stood at the head of the table, his notebook open, filled with scrawled notes and hastily inked diagrams. "There's something about the chorus line in the first recording," Namjoon began. "The part where the waveform spikes at exactly 18.145 kilohertz. It's consistent in every version. But when I ran it through a frequency isolator, I found something layered beneath it." He tapped the laptop. Pressed play. The room filled with static. Then, a voice. Human. Desperate. Speaking English, though distorted and shaky. "Can't stop it, it's already spread. If you're hearing this, don't replicate the tone. It's not a voice. It's a reflection. The more you harmonize with it, the more it learns." Youngie leaned forward. "What the hell is that?" "Audio artifact," Namjoon said. "A message left behind by someone else. Someone who encountered it before us." Taehyung's face was pale. "Before us?" "There were others," Jungkook said, finally breaking his silence. "They weren't idols or singers. But they found it. Maybe in caves. In broken instruments. In dead air. And they tried to lock it away in songs that no one would listen to." Jeon exhaled slowly. "We made it popular." Silence settled. Namjoon clicked again. Another file. This one was a frequency sweep recorded 2 years ago during their Wings tour. At the 247 mark, just as the final high note of Stigma echoed, the waveform glitched, once, almost imperceptibly. But now they could hear it. That same tone. Youngie looked sick. "We've been carrying it for years." Jimin's fingers dug into the edge of the table. "So what, it's infected our entire discography?" "No," Namjoon said. "It's more selective than that. It only resonates with what it understands. Sorrow. Obsession. Isolation." Taehyung spoke up, his voice thin. "It favors pain." Jungkook's eyes met his. "It feeds on it." They went through the tracks that night. Every song, every harmony, every lyric that had felt too heavy even at the time. The vulnerable bridges, the unspeakable refrains, the vocal takes that made them cry alone in the booth. Every time they broke emotionally during a session, it was there. Not controlling them, but listening. Namjoon theorized that the echo, whatever it truly was, functioned as a parasitic resonance. Not alive in a traditional sense, but able to shape meaning through mimicry. It heard sorrow, then sang it back. Each new repetition brought it closer to reality. We gave it identity, Jeong said bitterly. By naming it. By feeding it songs. By putting it in headphones around the world. But there's something else, Namjoon said. The original waveform Eric sent before the glass cracked, it's incomplete. I ran it through harmonic analysis. There's a missing counterfrequency. What does that mean? Jimin asked. Namjoon looked at Jungkook. It means the melody isn't finished. They argued for hours. Whether they should attempt to complete the song. Whether doing so would empower the entity or imprison it. Whether there was even a line left between performance and invocation. In the end, it was Jungkook who said the final word. I know the rest. They stared at him. I've heard it in my dreams. In the White Room. He was teaching it to me. And you didn't say anything? Jeon snapped, rising from his chair. You've been letting us sit in this madness while you... I didn't want to remember, Jungkook said, standing. But I do. And now it's louder than ever. Taehyung's voice broke. Then sing it. Everyone turned. Taehyung's expression was unreadable. If you already know it. If it's already in you. Sing the last part. Jungkook looked like he might refuse. Then, without warning, he began to hum. The final phrase. It was unlike anything they'd heard before. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't melodic. It was true. A sound of release. Of sorrow being exhaled. Of someone letting go. It didn't echo. It ended. Cleanly. And in that silence, Yoongi began to cry. So did Jeon. And Jimin. Namjoon simply closed his eyes. Taehyung whispered something in a language none of them recognized. And the lights in the studio didn't flicker. The mirrors didn't crack. The frequency on the monitor went flat. Not dead, but quiet. Complete. The file was stored on a hard drive with no internet access. They named it ending.wave. No plans to release it. No plans to speak of it. But every now and then, in interviews, Jungkook would pause when asked about inspiration. Jimin would glance at him, searching his face. And sometimes on stage, as the last note of the encore faded into the night. They'd all feel it. That clean silence. The kind that doesn't need to echo. Because the song has finally said everything it needed to say. The auditorium was empty, hollow as a chest exhaled of all breath. Light poured in from the high windows, dusty and gray like memories of the sun rather than its living warmth. It had been 2 months since they sang the final note. 2 months of stillness. 2 months of pretending that the echo was gone. But silence was a liar, and Jungkook knew it. He sat alone on the edge of the stage, his fingers ghosting across the keys of a Yamaha Baby Grand left behind from their pre-debut practice days. The others had gone home for the holiday break. The company said they deserved rest. Rest from what, exactly? Jungkook wasn't sure anymore. They hadn't released a statement. Hadn't talked about the recordings, the sessions, the strange files, or the cracked mirrors. To the world, they were merely on hiatus. But even when everything goes quiet, a hum remains under the skin. He pressed a single key. A low F. It rang sharp in the silence. He listened to it fade, but something didn't fade with it. There was an after-sound softer than resonance, like someone breathing just behind him. He didn't turn. He knew no one was there. And yet, wasn't it always like this now? When the door creaked open, he didn't jump. He knew that walk. The way the boots dragged slightly, not from fatigue, but from weight. Emotional, not physical. Yoongi, you ever going to go home? Yoongi's voice was gruff, but the concern was buried between the syllables. It's snowing. Everyone else went back to their families. Jungkook looked down at the keys. What if it's not done? Yoongi exhaled and stepped closer. We finished the song. We finished a song. Doesn't mean we finished it. Jungkook turned finally, his eyes sharp but sunken. There was a note I didn't sing. I held it back. On purpose. Yoongi froze. What do you mean? I knew it would complete the harmonic cycle. I felt it. Not just in my throat, but my blood. If I sang that last note, it wouldn't end with silence. It would end with something else. Yoongi pulled a chair across the floor, the legs screeching like a cry in an empty temple. You kept this from us? Jungkook didn't defend himself. Would you have let me sing it? Yoongi said nothing. Jungkook rose, walked away from the piano toward the back wall of the stage where the old set pieces from their early videos were kept, props, lights, backdrops. Covered in tarps. Silent ghosts of fame. I dream about it every night, he said. The note. Not the echo, not the mirrors, not the voice. Just the sound. As if the universe is holding its breath waiting for me to exhale. Don't, Yoongi said quietly. You don't owe the universe anything. Not anymore. Jungkook turned angry now. Don't you get it? It's not about me. It never was. That thing, it was just the reflection of what we never dealt with. The trauma. The pressure. The perfection. All the moments we swallowed our pain just to make another fan smile. It fed on that. It learned from it. Yoongi stared back hard. And what do you think happens if you give it a voice again? I don't know, Jungkook admitted. But maybe it's not about fighting it. Maybe it's about understanding it. What if that last note isn't a curse? What if it's closure? Yoongi stood slowly. Then you're playing God with sound. And we've already lost too much. Jungkook didn't argue. Because somewhere deep down he knew Yoongi was right. Later that night, Jungkook stood in his room, headphones clamped over his ears, staring at the blinking cursor on his DAW. One track. No vocals. Just breath. He layered the original frequency behind it, filtered, reversed, slowed to 0.85 speed. The wave didn't spike. But it vibrated. He pressed record. Then sang the note. A single syllable. No word. Just tone. It didn't echo. It pierced. The moment it left his mouth, every light in the dorm flickered. His laptop glitched. Then everything went black. Jimin was the first to reach him. He found Jungkook collapsed in his chair, the headphones askew, eyes closed but not asleep. His pulse was racing. Jimin shouted for help, dragged him down onto the floor, held his face in trembling hands. Wake up, come on, come back, eh? Jungkook's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Jimin like he didn't recognize him. Then whispered, I saw him again. Jimin shook his head. No, this was supposed to be over. He wasn't angry, Jungkook said. He was relieved. Yoongi and Namjoon burst in next, followed by Jeon. What happened? Namjoon asked, breathless. Jimin held up the headphone jack, still warm. He sang the note. Jin's mouth fell open. You, what? Jungkook sat up slowly, rubbing his chest. It didn't open anything. It closed something. Like sealing a door we never knew was open. Yoongi was pacing. You're playing with things you don't understand. No, Jungkook said. We do understand them. We just didn't want to admit they were part of us. Namjoon opened the DAW file. It wasn't corrupted. The waveform was perfect. But it looked strange. Mathematical. Balanced. Almost like a signature. The next day, they met in the studio, all seven. Taehyung had returned, pale and quiet. They sat around the same console as they had during the earliest sessions of their careers. I heard something last night, Taehyung said. In my head. It wasn't scary. It was a goodbye. Namjoon nodded. I think the echo was never trying to hurt us. It was trying to be heard. Not just by us, but by everything we've sung into the world. It needed to finish its line. So what now? Jeon asked. We record again? We make it into an album. Yoongi crossed his arms. We bury it. Jimin's voice cut in. No. We tell the truth. Jungkook looked up. For once, we sing what actually happened. Namjoon leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. But if we release this, if people hear it, they'll feel it too. Good, said Jungkook. Everyone looked at him. If we all carry echoes, he said, then maybe it's time we stop pretending we don't. Maybe healing doesn't happen in silence. Maybe it happens in resonance. The album was never marketed. No teaser. No MV. Just a digital drop. Unheard. 10 tracks. Each one raw. Each one containing remnants of the tone that had nearly broken them but shaped now, cradled, transformed. Fans cried. Others panicked. But no one could deny the power of what they felt. The music didn't haunt. It cleansed. Across the world, listeners shared strange but consistent experiences, vivid dreams that ended in silence, mirrors that stopped fogging, voices they'd heard for years simply fading. One message appeared across several fan forums, untraceable to any IP. The song is finished. You can rest now. And somewhere, deep in the back of the studio where it all began, the old piano sat quiet. Except sometimes. In the dead of night, it played a single note. Perfect. Unaccompanied. Unrepeated. The first real warning wasn't a scream, a whisper, or a shattering mirror. It was silence too perfect, too still. In the early morning hours, before the city began its metallic breathing, before Seoul reawakened with its traffic and lights and motion, Yoongi sat alone in Studio 7, staring at a screen that should have been moving. He'd been editing a track. Not for the group, not for the album. A private one. Something he didn't tell anyone about. He had isolated Jungkook's final note, and run it through an AI-based sound spectrogram. He expected resonance, maybe hidden patterns. But what the analysis returned made his fingers go numb. The waveform was still. No pulse. No frequency drift. As if the sound had been swallowed by something bigger than silence. As if it had reached beyond the confines of recorded time. He rechecked the input. Ran the diagnostics again. Still nothing. According to every digital system in the studio, Jungkook's note didn't exist. It had never existed. And yet, he could still hear it in his memory. That made Jungie's skin crawl. When the lights above him dimmed, flickered, stuttered, he didn't react with panic. He stood slowly, removed his headphones, and faced the soundproof glass. Someone was standing outside. Not moving. No camera crew. No staff. Just a figure cloaked in the half-darkness of the hallway, as still as the screen before him. Yoongi didn't call out. He walked to the glass. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink. Only when Jungkook reached the door handle did the figure raise one hand, palm open, toward the glass. The gesture stopped him cold. On the figure's palm, written in something darker than shadow, was a single word. Answer. He didn't open the door. When he blinked, the figure was gone. But on the studio monitor, the waveform returned. It pulsed once. And within the silence, a fragment of something new. Not a song. A question. The group hadn't been in the same room in nearly 3 weeks. Not because of conflict, but because of exhaustion. There was a shared understanding that what they had just created, the unheard album, wasn't a project. It was a ritual. Purge. And now each of them had retreated into their corners of life, trying to understand what came next when the monster you've carried has sung itself into silence. Yoongi called Namjoon first. I think the note was an invitation. Namjoon didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was slow, wary. To what? I don't know yet. But someone came to the studio. Namjoon's silence was louder than any reply. They didn't speak. They didn't even move. They just asked for an answer. Then maybe we gave the wrong one, Namjoon said, almost to himself. Yoongi blinked. What? Maybe that note wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of something we weren't supposed to reach. Yoongi laughed bitterly. You saying we broke the sound barrier spiritually? I'm saying maybe we didn't just release echo. Yoongi's breath caught. You think we created something else? Namjoon didn't laugh. No. I think we woke it up. Taehyung had been seeing the clocks again. Every digital device in his apartment had begun freezing at exactly 3:11 a.m. Not 3:33 anymore. This was new. A different time, consistent, undeniable. His oven, his phone, even his wristwatch all stopped. But only for a moment. Then everything returned to normal. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. A glitch. Stress. But when he started hearing music play, music no one else heard, he knew better. One night, lying on his side with the lights off and his eyes heavy with half-sleep, a lullaby started playing from the walls. Not his speakers. Not his phone. The walls. And it was his voice. But he had never recorded it. When he told Jimin, Jimin didn't laugh. He didn't question it either. He simply said, "Mine happens when I'm in the shower." Taehyung's head snapped up. What happens? I hear my own voice, Jimin said, voice soft, careful. But not in my head. Outside. Like someone is repeating everything I think before I say it. Like there's a version of me. One step ahead. Have you told Jungkook? Jimin shook his head. He's not okay. Jungkook had locked himself in his home studio for days. He stopped answering messages. The last text he sent read, "The note isn't done with us." When Namjoon finally showed up at his door, it took 20 minutes of knocking before Jungkook let him in. The room was dark. No windows open. No air. Just a tangle of cables, candles, and notebooks. You look like hell, Namjoon said, voice soft. Jungkook sat at the desk, hoodie up, hands trembling. I've been dreaming while awake, hearing things when I blink. I see people who aren't real, but they speak with our voices. Yours, Yoongi's, Taehyung's, even mine. Hallucinations. No, Jungkook snapped. Echoes of something else. Something coming. Namjoon didn't question it. What are they saying? Jungkook hesitated. Then, they say the silence is lying. that it's not over, that the song isn't finished, and they want us to write the final verse. Namjoon's blood ran cold. The final verse? Jungkook turned, eyes wild. They say there's another frequency, lower, below hearing, one that only responds to collective voices, not solos, all of us, together. Namjoon stared. Like a harmonic key. Jungkook nodded. They're waiting for it. Namjoon whispered. Who's they? Jungkook looked away. Us. Yoongi gathered everyone at the original studio. They didn't argue. There was no need. They were all hearing it now. Clocks freezing. Voices humming in walls. Reflections that whispered lyrics they hadn't written. Phones lighting up with audio files that couldn't be traced. The world answering back. Jeon arrived last. He said nothing, just sat down and pulled out his in-ears. I've seen our faces, he said unprompted, on the walls of my dreams, but they're not ours. They're cracked, like porcelain masks. No one spoke. Then Yoongi opened his laptop. I made a track, something we can use. A shell. No lyrics, just layers of ambient space. We write into it, as ourselves, as honestly as we can. Together, Jimin asked. Yoongi nodded. Namjoon added, one take, no edits. We don't clean this one. We document it. What if it opens something again? Taehyung asked. Then we name it, Jungkook said. And we close it ourselves. They each stepped into the booth. One by one. No lyrics prepared. Only emotions. Raw. Undiluted. Jeon wept as he sang. Jimin broke mid-verse but kept going. Taehyung sang in a language he didn't know. Namjoon didn't rap, he spoke. Yoongi barely sang at all, his voice a whisper. And Jungkook held the final note. But this time he didn't release it. He let it resonate. And within the vibration, something shifted. The sound didn't end. It opened. The studio went silent. The waveform froze. Then, a voice came through the speakers. Not human. Not alien. Just familiar. Like home. And it said very clearly, now we begin. Every device in the room powered down. No backup. No save. No trace of what they'd recorded. Gone. Jimin turned. What the hell was that? Jungkook's hands were shaking again. I think we said the first word of a sentence that hasn't been written yet. Namjoon's voice was low. So what comes next? Yoongi whispered. The second word. And outside the storm began again. The rain didn't let up. The streets of Seoul ran slick with light and shadow. The night smeared into glistening mirrors. Inside the old HYB basement studio, the 7 of them sat in silence. The walls hadn't been soundproofed like the upper floors. Down here you could hear the city's bones. The groaning of pipes. The deep hum of generators. The distant, distorted murmur of life continuing somewhere above. None of them said it, but they all felt the same thing. They were back at the beginning. Not the start of the project. The start of all of it. The start of them. I don't think this is about echo anymore, Namjoon said. Eyes fixed on nothing. Yoongi lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years. The cherry glowed briefly before he pulled it away, exhaling smoke into the low light. No, he murmured. This isn't about echo. Echo was the symptom. Then what's the disease? Jimin asked. Truth, Jungkook answered. He didn't look at anyone. His fingers were clenched around the arms of the folding chair, as if grounding himself to something. His skin looked pale, his eyes sunken, but his voice carried a weight that made no one interrupt him. I think what we're hearing, feeling, whatever this thing is, it's the sound of us fractured across time. Every moment we didn't say something we should have, every note we pushed out instead of letting it rise, every mask we wore when we were supposed to feel. It didn't go nowhere. It just waited. And now it's all coming back. Jeon leaned forward, elbows on knees. Then why now? Why not years ago? Taehyung answered before anyone else could. Because we're finally listening. There was a beat of silence. Jimin stood up, restless. He crossed the room and flicked on the old wall speaker. It hissed with static. No music. No voice. Just the absence of sound pretending to be sound. This started as a joke, he said, pacing now. You remember? That night? The podcast? We were teasing Jungkook about how he showers. That was it. That was all it was. Yoongi crushed the cigarette beneath his shoe. But he didn't laugh. I did laugh, Jungkook said softly. But I wasn't laughing at the joke. The others turned. I was laughing, he said slowly. Because it was the first time in years someone saw something I didn't show them. Something real. And I was terrified. Namjoon frowned. Of what? Of being known. The word dropped like a stone. Jin's lips tightened. We've always been known. No, Jungkook said, standing now. We've always been seen. But that's not the same thing. Being seen is performance. Being known, that's vulnerability. That's exposure. That's truth without arrangement. And I think that's what this entire thing has been about. He walked to the center of the room. The same spot he stood when he recorded Ending. Wave. The same space where the air always felt heavier, like it remembered more than it should. I think the silence didn't want to hurt us, he said. I think it wanted to rejoin us. We left pieces of ourselves behind. Too many songs unfinished. Too many lines choked back. Too many truths turned into metaphors because we were scared of what they meant. He looked at each of them. Taehyung, Yoongi, Jeon, Namjoon, Jimin. You've all heard it. The mirrors, the whispers, the dreams. It's not a haunting. It's a call. Jimin crossed his arms. To what? Jungkook looked at him, and for the first time since this all began he smiled. Not the fan service smile. Not the mask. Something smaller. Sadder. Reintegration. That night they didn't record. They remembered. Yoongi opened the vaults. Not the official archives, those were pristine, curated, clean. He opened the folders no one else saw. The raw ones. Rejected demos, late-night scratch vocals, voice memos they forgot existed. Jimin heard his 17-year-old self humming a melody he never finished. Jeon found an old monologue he recorded after their second win, the one he never played for anyone because he cried halfway through it. Taehyung listened to a haunting, broken track called Empty Hands. He laid down in a fit of panic during the Wings era. Never meant to be heard. Namjoon's laptop held a folder named It's Too Much. Inside were files dated across 5 years. Just quiet sobs. Journal entries spoken aloud. Breathing exercises. One was a minute and 40 seconds of him saying, I'm sorry, over and over, to no one. Yoongi had a file called Unheard Pre.Wave. It was the note, Jungkook's note, but recorded 6 years earlier. Impossible, Yoongi whispered. I've never heard this before, Jungkook said. Namjoon checked the timestamp. It was dated March 2nd, 2017. Before Echo. Before the podcast. Before the first mirror. They listened. It wasn't the same note. It was softer. But the frequency, the signature, was identical. Jimin put his head in his hands. It's always been there. No, Namjoon said. We've always been there. They all looked at him. Namjoon was staring at the speaker, as if the sound were about to burst through again. What if this isn't just sound? What if this isn't a haunting or an entity or a mirror world or anything like that? What if it's us, just reaching back, trying to finish what we couldn't say the first time? Jin's voice cracked. You're saying we're haunting ourselves? Namjoon shook his head. I'm saying we're echoing forward. The decision came without discussion. They opened every file, every rejected lyric, every discarded melody, and made one final track. No rhythm, no key, just memory. Jungkook sang lines from a dream he had during the Love Yourself tour. Taehyung recited a letter he never sent to himself at 17. Yoongi rapped lines pulled from the margins of his oldest notebook. Namjoon spoke a manifesto, his voice breaking on words like enough and forgive. Jeon sang harmony beneath every line, his falsetto folding into Jungkook's melody until it became indistinguishable. Jimin cried halfway through his verse. He didn't stop recording. They called the file the note that rewrote time. No mixing, no mastering, Just them. They uploaded it to the cloud under a dummy account. No tags. No announcement. Just 7 letters typed into the title field. Answer. Within 20 minutes, the servers crashed. People across the globe began reporting strange phenomena. Clocks freezing. Windows humming. Dreams syncing with strangers. Fans began hearing pieces of the song in old albums. Songs they'd listened to for years. But now they were different. As if the past had rewritten itself. People cried for no reason. Then smiled. Then wrote poetry. Drew pictures. Sent messages to people they hadn't spoken to in years. And from the quiet corners of Seoul, in a basement with walls that still remembered everything, 7 voices rose once more. Not to perform, not to entertain, not to heal, but to remember, to answer. And in that answer, the silence finally stopped listening. It sang back.